President Trump just promised every American a $2,000 check funded by tariffs. Sounds great, right? But here's what they're not telling you. The math doesn't add up. The government collected $195 billion in tariffs this year, but sending those checks would cost $600 billion. That's a $510 billion gap. So where's that money really going? Spoiler alert, it's not coming back to you. In the next minutes, I'm breaking down the actual numbers, exposing which corporations are making billions from this policy, and showing you why this might be the least effective economic stimulus in modern history. Let's follow the money. On Truth Social, in early November 2025, President Trump announced his vision for tariff dividends, direct payments of at least $2,000 per person to middle and lower income Americans, funded entirely by tariff revenue. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent later clarified these might come as tax deductions rather than direct checks, but the core promise remained. Your share of tariff revenue coming back to you. Here's the thing. I'm all for putting money back in Americans' pockets. But as someone who analyzes financial data for a living, I had to run the numbers. And what I found is concerning. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a nonpartisan organization that both Democrats and Republicans cite, published their analysis on November 11, 2025. Their conclusion? Even under the most optimistic scenarios, the tariff dividend proposal creates a massive funding shortfall. Let me walk you through the arithmetic, because it's actually pretty straightforward. In fiscal year 2025, which runs from October 2024 through September 2025, the United States collected approximately $195 billion in customs duties. That's a massive 153% increase from the previous year's $77 billion. The Trump administration's aggressive tariff expansion, including 50% tariffs on steel, 25% on automobiles, and sweeping tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, drove this revenue surge. $195 billion sounds like a lot of money. And it is. But here's the problem. To send $2,000 checks to approximately 300 million eligible Americans, excluding high-income earners as Trump specified, the total cost would be roughly $600 billion per year. That's 3 times what we're actually collecting. The math gets worse when you account for what economists call tax offsets. When tariffs slow economic activity, income and payroll tax revenue drops. The Congressional Budget Office estimates this offset at about 24%, so that $195 billion in gross revenue becomes $90 billion in net revenue after accounting for these economic effects. $600 billion needed, $90 billion available. That's a $510 billion annual shortfall. Now, before you click away thinking this is just partisan criticism, stay with me. Because the real story here isn't about whether tariff dividends are a good idea in theory, it's about where that tariff money is actually flowing right now. And that's where things get really interesting. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, hit that like button and subscribe. We're about to expose who's really profiting from this policy, and you're not going to believe some of these numbers. Chapters are in the description if you want to jump to specific sections, but I promise every part of this connects to show you the full picture. Here's a critical fact that gets lost in political rhetoric. Tariffs aren't paid by foreign countries. They're paid by American importers who pass those costs to consumers through higher prices. The Yale Budget Lab, one of the most respected economic research institutions in the country, published their comprehensive tariff analysis on October 17, 2025. Their findings are eye-opening. The average American household is paying approximately $3,800 per year in increased costs due to 2025 tariffs. But, and this is crucial, that burden isn't distributed equally. A household in the bottom income decile, earning under $15,000 annually, pays about $1,000 in tariff costs. That represents 2.7% of their total income. Compare that to a household in the top decile, earning over $150,000. They pay $8,100, much higher in absolute terms, but only 1.6% of their income. This is what economists call a regressive tax. Lower-income families pay a higher percentage of their income because they spend nearly everything they earn on consumer goods. The very items hit hardest by tariffs. Wealthy families can absorb these costs through savings or shift spending to services and investments. So, if American households are bearing this $3,800 average burden, and the government is collecting those tariff revenues, where's that money going? This is where the story gets fascinating. While American consumers pay higher prices and wait for dividend checks that may never arrive, Specific sectors of corporate America are experiencing unprecedented windfalls. On June 2, 2025, President Trump announced a doubling of steel tariffs from 25% to 50%. The market reaction was immediate and stunning. Cleveland-Cliffs, the largest flat-rolled steel producer in North America, saw its stock jump 33% in pre-market trading. 33%. In a single morning, Nucor gained 13%. U.S. Steel rose 5%, and Steel Dynamics added 10%. These aren't small companies. Cleveland-Cliffs has a market cap in the billions. A 33% single-day gain represents billions of dollars in shareholder value created, funded effectively by the higher prices American manufacturers and consumers now pay for steel. CEO Lourenco Goncalves of Cleveland-Cliffs called the tariff environment transformative for domestic steel production. And he's right. The company announced new facility expansions, including a $500 million plant in the Mojave Desert, confident that tariff protection will keep foreign competitors at bay. J.P. Morgan Chase reported second quarter 2025 results that stunned analysts. Investment banking revenue jumped 8% year over year to $2.5 billion. Trading revenue surged 8% to $8.9 billion. Why? Tariff-related market volatility created massive trading opportunities. As importers scrambled to adjust supply chains, as companies hedged currency and commodity risks, and as investors repositioned portfolios, Wall Street's trading desks printed money. J.P. Morgan's CFO explicitly credited tariff-induced volatility for boosting trading revenues. While American households absorbed $3,800 in costs, major banks converted that economic disruption into billions in profit. The auto industry split sharply based on import dependence. Tesla, with 0% import exposure, gained competitive advantage. Ford, with only 21% import ratio, maintained strong positioning. But companies like Hyundai, with 65% imports, or Volvo at 90%, faced existential pricing challenges. General Motors, sitting at 40 to 50% imports, reported that tariffs cost them $1.1 billion in Q2 alone, with full-year impacts projected between $4 and $5 billion. Their net income dropped 35%. This is getting into the details that major news outlets won't show you. If this analysis is valuable, drop a comment below with your biggest surprise so far. And we're not done. The legal wildcard I'm about to reveal could invalidate billions in tariff revenue and make the dividend proposal completely impossible. Stay with me. Not every corporation benefits. Understanding who loses helps us see the complete picture. RTX Corporation, formerly Raytheon Technologies, projects $850 million in tariff costs for 2025. That's nearly $1 billion in direct hits to their bottom line from steel, aluminum, and component tariffs. John Deere reported a 26% decline in Q3 net income, with $600 million in tariff costs. Gap Inc. faces $250 to $300 million in added expenses, translating to $100 to $150 million in operating income drag. These companies employ hundreds of thousands of Americans. When their costs rise, they cut investments, delay expansions, or reduce headcount. Walmart and Amazon face an impossible choice: absorb tariff costs and destroy margins, or pass them to consumers and lose market share. Walmart operates on roughly 2.5% margins. When tariff costs exceed that threshold, as they do on many product categories, absorption becomes impossible. CEO Doug McMillon stated bluntly, "Even at reduced levels, higher tariffs will result in higher prices." Amazon initially penalized third-party sellers for excessive price increases, but has since allowed selective adjustments. Data tracking shows 3.1 to 3.5% price increases on home goods and electronics. Now let's talk about economic effectiveness. Even if the tariff dividend were fully funded, would it be good stimulus? The answer, according to mainstream economics, is probably not. Economists measure stimulus effectiveness using the fiscal multiplier. How much GDP increases for every dollar of government spending? A multiplier of 2.0 means each dollar generates $2 in economic activity. Infrastructure investment has a multiplier of 1.5 to 2.0. Every dollar building roads, bridges, or broadband generates up to $2 in economic activity through job creation, materials purchases, and long-term productivity gains. Low-income targeted tax cuts have multipliers of 1.96 to 2.31. Why? Because lower-income households spend virtually every dollar immediately, creating maximum ripple effects through the economy. General tax cuts have multipliers of 0.5 to 1.0. Corporate tax cuts? 0.3 to 0.7. Wealthier recipients save more and spend less, reducing economic impact per dollar. Tariff rebates, estimated at 0.8 to 1.2. Why so low? Because they're simultaneously funded by a regressive consumption tax that's already reducing purchasing power. You're taking money from households through higher prices, running it through government bureaucracy, and returning a portion months later. The net stimulus effect is minimal. Compare this to the COVID-19 stimulus checks of 2020 and 2021. Those were funded by federal borrowing during an economic crisis with massive unemployment. The context was completely different. They had multipliers around 1.0 to 1.5 and contributed an estimated 2.6 percentage points to inflation. Tariff rebates in a near-full employment economy, funded by regressive taxes on consumer goods? That's a recipe for inflation without meaningful economic growth. Here's the twist that could make this entire discussion moot. On November 6, 2025, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments challenging President Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs. Legal analysts from across the spectrum noted deep skepticism from justices about whether IEEPA, a law designed for genuine national emergencies, can be used for broad revenue-raising tariffs. If the court strikes down IEEPA tariffs, approximately $89 billion in collected revenue could be invalidated. The government might be required to refund that money to importers, and future IEEPA-based tariff revenue would disappear. That would drop total annual tariff revenue from $195 billion to roughly $106 billion. The already impossible tariff dividend becomes mathematically absurd. Even if legal challenges fail, there's another problem: the 10-year revenue projection. The Penn Wharton budget model estimates that tariff revenue will decline from $294 billion in 2026 to $237 billion by 2032 as importers shift to domestic sources or alternative suppliers. Over 10 years, total tariff revenue is projected at about $3 trillion. Annual tariff dividends would cost $6 trillion. Even over a decade, you're $3 trillion short. Let's bring this home to what actually matters for everyday Americans. Right now, you're paying an extra $3,800 per year on average in tariff-related costs. If you're in a lower income bracket, it's a higher percentage of your income. The proposed $2,000 dividend, if it ever materializes, would return only about 53% of what you're already paying in higher prices. And that's before accounting for the inflation risk of deficit funding the remaining gap. Meanwhile, protected steel companies, automakers with low import ratios, and Wall Street trading desks are converting your cost burden into record profits. This isn't a partisan observation. These are the numbers. Whether you support tariffs as a strategic trade policy tool is a separate question from whether tariff dividends are economically viable or effective stimulus. If this breakdown has been valuable, smash that subscribe button. I do deep dive financial analysis on the policies and market moves that actually affect your money. And drop a comment. Do you think tariff dividends will ever actually be paid? I read every comment, and your insights often shape future videos. The tariff dividend proposal represents a classic case of political promises running headfirst into economic reality. The math doesn't work. $600 billion needed, $90 billion available. The distribution is regressive. You're paying more than you'd receive. The beneficiaries are overwhelmingly corporate, not middle-class households. And the stimulus effectiveness is among the lowest of any fiscal policy option. None of this means tariffs are inherently bad policy. Reasonable people disagree on trade strategy. But what's indisputable is that tariff dividends, as currently proposed, cannot be funded without massive deficit spending, which would trigger inflation that erodes the value of those very dividend checks. The real winners? Cleveland Cliffs shareholders who saw 33% single-day gains. JP Morgan traders converting volatility into billions. Domestic manufacturers with tariff protection? The real losers. American families paying $3,800 per year in higher prices. Defense contractors eating $850 million in costs. Retailers forced to choose between margins and market share. And you, waiting for a $2,000 check that will likely never clear the fundamental arithmetic of fiscal reality. The next time someone promises you free money from tariff revenue, remember, it's your money to begin with, extracted through a consumption tax, with most of it redirected to corporate balance sheets. That's the real story of tariff dividends in 2025. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more deep dive financial analysis, and I'll see you in the next one.